Let's be honest. If you thought your family was complicated, you've clearly never spent a millennium eavesdropping on the Olympians. Tonight, we're diving headfirst into the world's most prestigious, unhinged soap opera, the ancient Greek gods. Imagine a group chat where every message is either a power move, an existential crisis, or a family lawsuit waiting to happen. But before we get tangled up in lightning bolts and divine grudges, take a second to hit like and subscribe, only if you're actually enjoying this cosmic chaos, of course. And, because I'm cursed to care, drop your city and time zone in the comments. I may be cosmically exiled, but I still want to know who's out there listening as the sun rises and sets over this ridiculous pantheon. If you're ready, dim the lights, summon whatever snacks you dare offer a vengeful god, and let's step into Olympus together. At the top of this glittering, dysfunctional hierarchy stands Zeus, the sky's self-appointed CEO, Thunder's original influencer, and living proof that too much authority is a one-way ticket to boundary-free living. Zeus was the youngest son of Cronus and Rhea, a couple whose idea of parenting was, well, let's call it digestively involved. Cronus, ever the paranoid dad, swallowed each of his newborn kids whole. Why? To prevent them from overthrowing him, which, ironically, never works out in mythology. Rhea, understandably fed up with her husband's baby-devouring diet, swapped out baby Zeus for a rock wrapped in a blanket. Cronus, apparently not the sharpest titan in the quarry, gulped down the rock and called it a day. This is the kind of attention to detail you'd expect from a guy running the universe on vibes alone. Zeus, meanwhile, grew up in secret, nurtured by nymphs, goats, and an endless supply of prophecy. When Zeus finally came of age, he did what any traumatized Olympian would, staged a coup. He recruited his siblings Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Hestia, and Demeter, by first slicing open Cronus like a divine piñata and freeing everyone who'd been on the menu. Freud would need several lifetimes to unpack this family. With their powers combined, the gods waged a cataclysmic war against the Titans, ultimately booting the old guard out of power and setting up shop atop Mount Olympus. Thus, the original dysfunctional dynasty was born, complete with thunderbolts, tridents, and the world's worst family therapy sessions. After their victory, the siblings split the cosmos like kids divvying up Halloween candy. Zeus snagged the sky, Poseidon took the sea, Hades drew the short straw and got the underworld, and the rest found their domains wherever there was chaos to be managed. Zeus ruled the heavens, kept cosmic order, at least on paper, and enforced justice and oaths. In reality, he spent more time transforming into animals and seducing anyone who made eye contact than he did managing the universe. We're talking swans, bulls, eagles, golden showers, you name it. Zeus approached romance like a Supreme Court justice who'd discovered Tinder and shapeshifting. The result? Olympus's HR department working overtime. Zeus's love life was a walking disaster. He married his sister Hera, mythology's answer to why not double down on the drama, then promptly launched a centuries-long parade of affairs with goddesses, nymphs, mortals, and I swear, possibly the odd shrub. The man was prolific. His demigod kids roamed every corner of Greece, most nursing abandonment issues and accidentally founding several famous cities. If you've ever wondered why half the heroes in myth have daddy issues, now you know. Zeus was both the problem and the paternity test. But for all his wandering hands and wild transformations, Zeus wasn't pure chaos. On his rare responsible days, he did act as Olympus's referee, upholding oaths, punishing hubris, and occasionally smiting mortals who forgot to burn the right sacrifices. He wielded power with a mixture of showmanship and self-importance, and while he was respected and feared, he also left a trail of PR disasters that would make even the most seasoned crisis manager weep. Zeus was a paradox, protector and predator, judge and joke, the ultimate contradiction in a toga. Now let's talk about Hera. She's technically the goddess of marriage, family and childbirth, a role that's either the universe's cruelest joke or just wildly ironic, given her own marriage is less happily ever after and more flaming chariot crash. Hera is both Zeus's wife and his sister, because mythological family trees are more like tangled grapevines. Their wedding was supposed to be the gold standard for divine union, but it devolved instantly into a multi-millennia saga of infidelity, revenge, and more transformations than a season of reality TV. Hera reigns as the undisputed queen of the gods, but her superpower is vengeance. meticulous, creative, and rarely aimed at the actual culprit. Instead of going after Zeus, Hera's fury is laser-focused on the women he seduces, or let's be honest, outright kidnaps, and their unlucky children. She once turned Io into a cow, condemned Echo to a life of, well, echoing, and in a truly Olympic display of pettiness, sent serpents to kill baby Hercules in his crib. Not even a onesie could save that child. Instead of therapy, Hera's coping mechanism is eternal curses. Revenge was the ancient Greek version of self-care. Yet, as much as you might want to blame her, imagine being the goddess of marriage while your husband is out inventing new forms of animal-based pick-up artistry. She's not just a grudge holder, she's also the divine protector of women in childbirth, the enforcer of marital vows, and the punisher of broken oaths. Hera had her own cults, temples, and fiercely loyal cities, Argos and Samos among others, who worshipped her as the backbone of divine order. In short, Hera was the goddess you prayed to for a healthy marriage, and the one who probably hexed your crops if your spouse strayed. Hera is a paradox in a golden crown, a woman forced to symbolize unity while holding Olympus together with nothing but rage and high-stakes spite. Her story isn't just about jealousy, it's about dignity and power in a world built to humiliate her. She's the queen holding the empire together with sheer willpower, a sharp tongue, and a legendary collection of grudges. The next time you hear someone call her petty, remember she's doing the emotional labor of an entire pantheon and getting none of the credit. Let's wade into the stormy waters of Poseidon, god of the sea, earthquakes, storms, and, because why not, horses. Nothing says ocean deity like a herd of galloping stallions, right? Poseidon is Zeus's brother and one of the big three. Zeus got the sky, Hades got the underworld, and Poseidon claimed everything wet and unpredictable. He ruled the oceans, commanded sea monsters that ranged from majestic to nightmare fuel, and brandished a trident, a three-pronged divine rage stick, capable of shaking the earth itself. Poseidon was worshipped and feared, sailors offered sacrifices for calm seas, fishermen prayed for a good catch, and city planners double-checked their blueprints to avoid Poseidon's wrath. If you forgot to thank him at your shoreline goat roast, don't be surprised if your new harbour ends up underwater by morning. He was the classic unpredictable uncle, sometimes generous, sometimes devastating, always a bit salty. One day he's creating islands, the next he's flooding fields because he lost a city naming contest to Athena. And let's be real, who wouldn't be a little sour after losing out to an olive tree? Poseidon's emotional storms were legendary. He offered Athens a saltwater spring in the great contest, only to be upstaged by Athena's olive tree. The people picked olives, and Poseidon picked vengeance, flooding the land just to prove a point. That's Poseidon in a nutshell. A force of nature with a grudge, as likely to bless you as to sink your boat for fun. His love life? Just as tangled. There were nymphs, mortals, and one infamous encounter with Medusa, which left her with snakes for hair, and him with zero consequences, a recurring theme for male gods, if you hadn't noticed. Still, Poseidon wasn't just a cranky stormbringer. He could be a protector, a builder, and even a source of prosperity. Ancient Greeks depended on the sea for their survival, and Poseidon's favour could mean the difference between feast and famine. Like the ocean itself, he was beautiful and bountiful one moment, destructive and terrifying the next. You never quite knew which Poseidon you'd get, calm waters or a tidal wave of divine mood swings. Now on to Hades, the god who drew the cosmic short straw. Hades is lord of the underworld, which isn't exactly hell but more like a sprawling, gloomy office park where every soul eventually clocks in for eternity. While Zeus ruled the sky and Poseidon the sea, Hades was handed the job of managing the afterlife's logistics, eternally surrounded by restless spirits and echoing complaints. If Olympus is the wild party upstairs, Hades is the guy running customer service in the basement, quietly keeping the whole operation from falling apart. Contrary to what Disney might suggest, Hades wasn't evil or especially cruel. He was just endlessly tired of everyone else's drama. He didn't hurl lightning bolts, crash weddings, or chase after mortals. Instead, he quietly ruled over the underworld, which he fittingly named after himself. His realm was divided into areas: Elysium for the heroes, Asphodel for the average souls, and Tartarus for the truly wicked. a place that felt like detention, only with worse snacks. Hades managed it all with a kind of dark, brooding efficiency. He came across less like a villain and more like a gothic middle manager, just trying to keep things running smoothly while everyone else made a mess. And then there's Persephone, not Hades' finest moment. He did kidnap her, which is about as problematic as it sounds, but in a twist even the gods didn't see coming. Their relationship grew into something resembling a stable, if unconventional marriage. Persephone spent half the year in the underworld, bringing a touch of life to the land of the dead, and the other half on Earth, kicking off spring. If you've ever been in a long-distance relationship with seasonal affective disorder, you get the idea. It's not really romance, it's more like the first mythological timeshare. Hades had a soft spot for pets too. His dog Cerberus, a three-headed canine with the temperament of a malfunctioning security system, guarded the gates and kept the souls in line. Hades himself was loyal, reserved, and not remotely interested in the spotlight. Unlike his brothers, he didn't cheat, didn't rage, and didn't crave attention. That's probably why the Greeks built so few temples for him. They respected him, but kept their distance. He was the quiet, intimidating uncle you never invited to the family barbecue, but always sent a Christmas card, just in case. So there you have it, the original Olympian family, 1 part divine power, 2 parts spectacular dysfunction, and a generous splash of unresolved trauma. Zeus, the walking HR violation. Hera, the queen of cosmic spite. Poseidon, the oceanic grudge machine. And Hades, the goth administrator, who just wants everyone to file their paperwork and leave him alone. They're proof that absolute power doesn't make you wise, it just gives you more creative ways to ruin Thanksgiving. And as you let all this sink in, remember, their stories didn't just shape ancient Greece, they're the blueprint for every messy, complicated family drama since. But the dysfunction doesn't stop here. Next up, we're diving into the battlefield of brains and brawn, with the next generation of divine siblings. Athena is the goddess of wisdom, war strategy, handicrafts, and staying 10 steps ahead of everyone without breaking a sweat. Trust me, you're going to want to see how she and her brother Ares redefine what it means to be both brilliant and belligerent. Stay tuned. Let's talk about Athena, the goddess who could probably outwit your entire office and still have time to audit your fantasy football league. Athena stands for wisdom, strategy, crafts, and the art of never losing her cool. Basically the only Olympian who treats war like a game of chess instead of a bar brawl. She's logic incarnate, dropped into a pantheon of impulsive drama magnets, armed with lightning bolts and unresolved trauma. And if you think your birth story is complicated, try being Athena. Zeus being Zeus, hears a prophecy that his child with Metis will overthrow him, so naturally he swallows Metis whole, because that's what you do when you're king of the gods and have the emotional stability of a caffeinated squirrel. Then Zeus gets the mother of all migraines. Instead of calling for a healer, he calls for a hammer, and with one good swing to his skull, Athena bursts out, full-grown, fully armoured, and already rolling her eyes at the entire family. Forget baby photos. Athena skipped diapers and went straight to workplace evaluations. From her very first breath, Athena was done with nonsense. She had no patience for melodrama or petty squabbling. While her brother Ares saw war as a chance to swing wildly and break things, Athena approached battle like a tactician with a colour-coded spreadsheet. In fact, if Ares is a bar fight at 2 a.m., Athena is the CEO in the war room, calmly circling errors on the battle plan and asking if anyone has tried not screaming. She's also the goddess of crafts, which at first glance might sound like she runs an Etsy shop on the side. But in Athena's hands, weaving isn't just about throwing blankets together, it's a full-contact sport. Ask Arachne, the mortal who challenged Athena to a weaving battle and actually outdid her. Instead of applause, Arachne got a lifetime supply of cobwebs. Moral: if you challenge a goddess, be prepared to redecorate your entire life as wall art. Unlike her Olympian siblings, Athena wanted nothing to do with romance. She didn't seduce mortals, turn into swans, or marry her own relatives. She simply had better things to do. She kept her armor spotless, mentored heroes, and maintained a strict zero-tolerance policy for nonsense. Athena was the silent partner behind Odysseus's homecoming, Perseus's monster-slaying adventures, and most likely the frustrated editor who corrected Homer's endless epics. If you needed someone to lead your troops, judge your debate, or streamline your city's infrastructure, Athena was your goddess. She didn't need to shout, scheme, or flirt her way to power. She just always annoyingly won. Now let's spin the camera over to Ares, the god of war, bloodshed, and making terrible decisions at full volume. Ares is basically what happens when you give a sledgehammer a gym membership and absolutely no supervision. If Athena is war with a meticulously drawn blueprint, Ares is war with a flaming wheelbarrow and a total disregard for property damage. He doesn't plan, he doesn't strategize, he just dives in. Fists first, thoughts never. The Greeks saw Ares as the living embodiment of battle's chaos, the kind of chaos where armor flies, someone's already missing a helmet, and no one's quite sure whose side they're supposed to be on. When Ares enters the field, expect a lot of noise, a lot of mess, and a lot of people regretting their life choices. Ares wasn't exactly winning most popular on Mount Olympus either. Even among his own family, he was that guy everyone winced at during reunions. Zeus once called him the most hated of all the gods, which is a bold claim from a guy who's personally responsible for at least half the world's scandals. Ares was arrogant, impulsive, and about as subtle as a bronze battering ram in a pottery shop. The Greeks admired brains over brawn, which is why Ares, with his zero-tactics approach, rarely got statues built in his honor. He didn't win wars, he just started them, often leaving friends and foes alike to clean up the smoking crater behind him. Still, nobody could deny Ares was terrifying. He was the god of fear itself, and his sons were none other than Phobos and Deimos, panic and terror, because apparently subtlety is for mortals. Ares did have his moments of excitement off the battlefield, though. His infamous affair with Aphrodite brought him all kinds of attention, mostly the kind you'd rather not have. When Hephaestus, her husband, caught them in an invisible net, the whole pantheon gathered around to point and laugh. Imagine your worst date going viral on Mount Olympus's version of reality TV. And yet, over in Rome, Ares got a rebrand as Mars disciplined, stoic, and much less likely to flip a table. But to the Greeks, Ares stayed true to form, a muscle-bound disaster zone, with a chariot pulled by fire-breathing horses, and the energy of someone who's just discovered pre-workout supplements. Even so, warriors on the ground still feared and respected him. Offerings to Ares weren't about winning his favor. They were more like bribes to avoid his attention, and when he wasn't starting fights or starring in divine gossip, you had to admit, Ares at least knew how to make an entrance. So that's Athena and Ares, wisdom and war, order and chaos, chessboard and shattered table. The Olympian family tree is basically a group project that desperately needed a therapist. But if you think that's complicated, wait until you meet the rest. Up next, we're diving headfirst into the tangled love lives, creative disasters, and questionable moral choices of Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Hermes, and Demeter. And trust me, if you thought war was messy, just wait until desire gets involved. Aphrodite was the goddess of love, beauty, desire, and romantic messes with extremely high body counts. Aphrodite, goddess of love, beauty, and the kind of desire that can topple empires or ruin a perfectly good family reunion, is proof that the universe has a wicked sense of humor. If you've ever watched someone fall head over sandals for exactly the most disastrous person in the room, you've seen Aphrodite at work, probably cackling behind a column. Now, depending on your appetite for divine weirdness, there are two competing origin stories for her. In the more sanitized version, she's the daughter of Zeus and Dio, which already makes her a member of the world's worst family tree. But if you prefer your myths with a side of emotional scarring, the older tale claims Aphrodite was born from sea foam, mind you, after Cronus, in a fit of generational drama, severed Uranus's godly bits and hurled them into the ocean. Yes, the literal goddess of romance emerged from a celestial crime scene. You'd think this would make her the patron of therapy, but no, she went straight for love and beauty, and left the trauma for everyone else to sort out. Aphrodite's entrance onto the cosmic stage was so dazzling, it rendered both mortals and gods unable to make even a single rational choice. She possessed an enchanted belt, the legendary cestus, which basically functioned as a cheat code for attraction, one clasp, and suddenly everyone within eyeshot was ready to compose poetry, or, more realistically, make a complete mess of their lives. But here's the twist. For all her sway over hearts, Aphrodite's own love life was the stuff of soap operas and cautionary tales. She was married off to Hephaestus, the god of fire, smithing, and being the only Olympian who understood what a work ethic was. Yet Aphrodite found herself drawn not to her reliable craftsman husband, but to Ares, the walking embodiment of bad decisions and unnecessary violence. She and Ares carried on a torrid affair, believing themselves clever, until Hephaestus, ever the artisan, constructed a golden net to catch them in the act. He then summoned the rest of the gods for a front-row seat to their humiliation, because nothing says divine retribution like turning your marital crisis into a group spectacle. Ancient Greece, where public shaming was a legitimate problem-solving strategy. Still, to paint Aphrodite as pure chaos would be missing half the picture. She was also the goddess who comforted bashful lovers, whispered courage into the ears of those about to confess their feelings, and graced the world with beauty simply by existing. She presided over weddings, helped the lovesick, and inspired artists to chase the sublime. Yet, let's not pretend she was above a little world-altering drama when the mood struck. Remember the Trojan War? That all kicked off because Aphrodite bribed Paris with the promise of Helen, the most beautiful mortal alive, just so she could win a celestial beauty contest. All for a golden apple inscribed to the fairest. She effectively set fire to an entire civilization. Romance, after all, is a force of nature, and Aphrodite was less concerned with boundaries than with spectacle. If you're picturing the goddess of love as nurturing and stable, you're in for disappointment. Aphrodite was intoxicating, magnetic, and utterly uninterested in your carefully negotiated relationship rules. She didn't just inspire romance, she made sure it was messy, world-shaking, and impossible to ignore. She is the reason so many mortals and immortals alike walked straight into disaster, convinced they were following their hearts, when really they were just extras in her never-ending drama. Now let's shift the spotlight to Hephaestus, the god of fire, metallurgy, and the kind of practical intelligence that rarely gets the applause it deserves. Unlike his more glamorous siblings, Hephaestus was the one Olympian who actually had a job description. While Zeus tossed thunderbolts like confetti, and Ares chased after every conflict in sight, Hephaestus toiled away in his forge, building weapons, palaces, and the occasional cursed accessory, often muttering to himself about the latest divine mess he was expected to clean up. Hephaestus's origin story, like so many Olympian tales, is a masterclass in family dysfunction. In one version, he's born deformed, and Hera, repulsed by his appearance, hurls him off Mount Olympus as if he were yesterday's leftovers. In another, Zeus does the tossing after a particularly heated marital spat. Either way, Hephaestus plummets from heaven, crash lands, and is left with a limp and abandonment issues that could fill a Greek tragedy. But here's where his story takes a sharp left turn. He doesn't beg for forgiveness. Instead, he crafts a golden throne for Hera, one that secretly traps her when she sits down. The gods, suddenly missing their queen and unable to free her, grovel at Hephaestus's feet. He agrees to release her, but only if he's welcomed back among the gods. That's not just revenge, that's negotiation with flair. Once reinstated on Olympus, Hephaestus became the indispensable engineer of the heavens. He forged Zeus's thunderbolts, Poseidon's trident, armor for Achilles, and pretty much every weapon or artifact worth boasting about. If it glowed, flew, or exploded on cue, you can bet Hephaestus put in the overtime, probably unpaid, to make it happen. Yet for all his skill, he was consistently the butt of his family's jokes. His wife Aphrodite never chose him and never pretended otherwise. His parents treated him with frosty indifference. His divine co-workers only ever seemed to notice him when something broke. But Hephaestus didn't rage or plot. His vengeance was subtle, elegant, and always served cold. Even that infamous golden net, designed to ensnare Aphrodite and Ares mid-fling, was both a work of art and a lesson in passive-aggressive genius. Hephaestus wasn't glamorous, and he certainly didn't sparkle, but make no mistake, Olympus was built on his sweat and ingenuity. He's the unsung hero of the gods, patron of smiths, inventors, and anyone who's ever threatened to quit and then fixed everything with a bit of metal and a lot of pent-up frustration. Hermes. Now Hermes is the god of travellers, commerce, thieves and rapid-fire excuses. He's the one with winged sandals, a dubious staff, and the kind of energy you'd get if coffee could manifest as a person. From the moment he was born, Hermes was trouble on two chubby, quick-moving legs. On day one, yes, literally the day of his birth, he crawled out of his crib, stole Apollo's cattle, invented the lyre out of a tortoise shell, and snuck back before anyone could catch him. Most gods take centuries to cause that much mayhem. Hermes did it before most mortals finished their first nap. Calling Hermes the messenger of the gods is like calling the internet just a mail service. He didn't just deliver messages, he smuggled souls to the underworld, guided heroes through enemy territory, and probably invented same-day delivery, though the tracking information was always suspiciously vague. If someone was in trouble, Hermes had already solved the problem, left 3 misleading clues, and skipped town with your lunch money. He was also the god of commerce and trade, because obviously you want the same guy overseeing both honest transactions and outright theft. Hermes embodied negotiation, persuasion, and the kind of creative accounting that would make even the boldest tax evader blush. He's the patron of salespeople, travelers, pickpockets, and anyone who's ever convinced someone to trade a perfectly good goat for a slightly magical pebble. But for all his mischief, Hermes had a surprising streak of loyalty. He helped Odysseus outwit Circe, equipped Perseus with the tools to take down Medusa, and guided the souls of the dead to their final rest with a gentleness that almost made you forget he'd probably stolen their wallet on the way. Hermes carried the caduceus, a staff twined with 2 snakes and topped with wings. It's often confused with the symbol of medicine, which is hilarious considering Hermes's main credentials were speed, deception, and a complete disregard for boundaries. If Olympus had an IT department, Hermes would be the guy who fixed your problem in 2 minutes, spoke only in acronyms, and then vanished to optimize the divine network and maybe slip Zeus's credit card into his own pocket on the way out. Hermes was clever, quick, unreliable, and somehow endlessly lovable. He was the god of getting things done, getting away with it, and never, under any circumstances, answering follow-up questions. If you needed a favor or an alibi, he was your man, as long as you didn't mind a little chaos in the bargain. Finally, we arrive at Demeter, goddess of the harvest, grain, and the kind of conditional generosity that could feed or starve the world depending on her mood. Demeter was quieter than her siblings. She didn't toss lightning or start wars, but don't let that fool you. She held the power to shut down the planet's food supply with nothing but a frown. When Demeter was happy, fields overflowed, fruit trees bent with abundance, and the world felt alive. When she was angry or grieving, the earth withered, crops failed, and mortals learned very quickly not to take their bread for granted. The heart of Demeter's story is her relationship with her daughter Persephone. Imagine Persephone, a bright, gentle young goddess, out picking flowers, minding her own business, when suddenly the ground splits open, and Hades, king of the underworld and professional kidnapper, emerges to snatch her away. Greek mythology, where family drama is always one earthquake away. Demeter, upon discovering her daughter's disappearance, was inconsolable. She roamed the world in grief, refusing to let a single seed sprout until Persephone was returned. Crops died, animals starved, and mortals began to panic. Zeus, ever pragmatic, noticed the sacrificial offerings drying up and finally intervened. A compromise was struck. Persephone would spend part of the year with Hades in the underworld and part with Demeter on the surface. And so the seasons were born, spring and summer, when mother and daughter are reunited and the world blooms, autumn and winter when Demeter withdraws in sorrow and everything fades. In the end, one of the most basic rhythms of nature, why we have seasons, boils down to a mother's love, loss, and a deal struck under emotional duress. Global agriculture, powered by maternal grief and more than a little emotional blackmail. Demeter, for all her nurturing power, was not without her own sense of justice and, frankly, a tendency toward the dramatic. She taught mortals the secrets of wheat and civilization, and then, when a royal couple interrupted her sacred ritual, she burned their baby out of spite. There's a fine line between Earth Mother and terrifying witch, and Demeter danced across it with gusto. But at her core she represented resilience, nurture, and the sacred bond between a mother and her child. She could bring forth life or withhold it in a heartbeat, reminding mortals and gods alike that even the gentlest powers can shape the fate of the world. So there you have it, Aphrodite, who could start a war over a beauty contest; Hephaestus, the unsung builder with a sharp memory for slights; Hermes, the divine trickster who never stood still long enough for consequences to catch up; and Demeter, the earth's great provider and occasional withholder. Together, they make up a slice of Olympus as messy, brilliant, and emotionally complicated as any family reunion you've ever barely survived. Of course, if you think these four sound wild, just wait until you meet the next batch. Dionysus, Artemis, Apollo, and Hestia are about to crash the party, bringing with them wine, wisdom, rebellion, and the world's most underappreciated hearthfire. Because on Olympus, the revelry never stops, it just changes flavor. Dionysus is the god of wine, revelry, fertility, theatre, madness, and those questionable decisions you make after your third glass of whatever he's pouring. Let's talk about Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, theatre, good times, bad decisions, and the kind of existential chaos that only makes sense after your fourth goblet of whatever he's pouring. Dionysus is what happens when divine power collides with an open bar and zero parental supervision. Picture him, crowned in ivy, eyes a little wild, possibly summoning a panther just because he's bored. If you've ever woken up after a festival with a vague sense of dread, a wreath tangled in your hair, and a suspicious memory involving dancing goats, you've had a Dionysian night. His birth was, and I say this as someone who's seen some things, peak Olympian drama. He's the love child of Zeus, serial adulterer and king of the gods, and Semele, a mortal woman who had the misfortune of catching Zeus's eye. Hera, queen of jealousy and the original doom-scroller, found out and set her sights on destruction. She convinced poor Semele to ask Zeus to reveal his true godly form. Semele did, Zeus obliged, and, surprise, Semele was instantly reduced to a pile of mortal dust. Zeus, not one to let a little thing like spontaneous human combustion end a family line, scooped up the still gestating Dionysus and, in a move that absolutely no mortal doctor would endorse, stitched the baby into his own thigh. Yes, you heard me, thigh pregnancy. In the pantheon of what were you thinking medical choices, that one's a Hall of Famer. Dionysus emerged from Zeus's leg, fully cooked and ready to cause trouble. He spent his youth wandering the earth, spreading the secrets of winemaking, orchestrating carnivals of joy, and leaving a trail of hangovers and mild existential dread in his wake. His entourage? A parade of satyrs, maenads, and woodland misfits, all of them either blissfully intoxicated or in the process of destroying someone's crop yield. It was less travelling priesthood and more eternal Burning Man, but with divine consequences. His rituals weren't just about the wine. They were about dissolving boundaries, letting go of your identity, your inhibitions, and frequently your clothing. Dionysian festivals were immersive, disorienting, and honestly a little terrifying. Masks, theatre, wild music, all under the stars, a collective escape from reality, until the sun came up and you had to find your sandals. But don't be fooled, behind the party god exterior, Dionysus had a temper. If you mocked him, denied his divinity, or refused his worship, delightful chaos quickly turned into absolute nightmare fuel. One king who banned his cult was rewarded with madness so intense that his own people, who, let's be clear, were probably very tired of his anti-party policies, ripped him to pieces. Another got off easy and was turned into a dolphin. Dionysus did not do minor punishments. He did Broadway-level statement punishments, with a chorus and everything. Yet, here's the paradox. For all his wildness, Dionysus was incredibly compassionate to outsiders, the broken, the exiled, the weirdos who didn't fit into polite society. He offered them comfort, gave them purpose, and sometimes, in a fit of symbolism only the Greeks could love, transformed them into vines. He's divine liberation and destruction in one sparkly package, joy and madness, art and ruin. Dionysus is the god who'll inspire you to paint a masterpiece at midnight, then have you dancing barefoot in a vineyard at dawn, questioning all your choices. Now let's pivot from chaos to precision. Meet Artemis, goddess of the hunt, wilderness, wild animals, and the moon. Artemis is the patron saint of Don't Even Try Me. Her doleful facial expression is No, I will not explain myself, and yes, that was definitely a threat. She's usually seen with a bow in one hand, a wolf at her side, and an air of zero tolerance that could freeze fire. Twin sister to Apollo, Artemis entered the world in true overachiever fashion. She helped deliver her twin brother right after her own birth. And from that moment, Artemis was officially done with men. She swore off marriage, romance, and anything that smelled like emotional vulnerability. Instead, she roamed the wilds, hunted stags, and built a loyal pack of maidens who shared her love for nature and her allergy to drama. Artemis's purity isn't the fainting couch kind, it's the touch me and you're a dear kind. Take Actaeon, for example. He stumbles upon Artemis bathing, which, to be fair, happens a lot in myth, and instead of a stern lecture on personal space, she transforms him into a stag and lets his own dogs do the rest. Message delivered, boundaries established, no further questions. Artemis is fiercely protective, especially of women and children. While most Olympians treat mortals like chess pieces or Tinder profiles, Artemis is a divine shield for the vulnerable. Disrespect sacred nature, harm the innocent, or cross her maidens, and her vengeance will be swift, poetic, and almost always fatal. As a moon goddess, she's calm, clear, and mysterious. She brings light to the night and guides travelers through darkness, both literally and, if you ask her followers, spiritually. If Apollo is the sun's blinding brilliance, Artemis is the moon's cold, focused stare. Less warmth, more watchfulness. She doesn't need to be flashy. Artemis has presence. You don't challenge her, you don't flirt with her, you just hope she's not drawing her bow in your direction. On the modern spectrum, Artemis is the original independent woman, fierce, free, uninterested in your opinions, and allergic to patriarchal nonsense. She doesn't live on Olympus. She runs wild in the woods, untouchable. Speaking of shining, let's turn our attention to Apollo, the god of the sun. Music, prophecy, healing, poetry, and honestly whatever else was left on the Olympian job board. If Olympus had LinkedIn, Apollo's profile would crash the whole site. Twin brother to Artemis, Apollo is the golden boy, literally. Golden hair, golden lyre, golden chariot. He's the reason daylight exists, according to the Greeks, because he drives the sun across the sky every morning in a flaming chariot. No pressure if you sleep in. But beneath that dazzling exterior, Apollo is a swirling mass of feelings. He's dramatic, he's emotional, he's the guy who writes you a breakup ballad and then curses you for not appreciating his artistry. Ask Daphne. She had to transform into a laurel tree to get away from his relentless wooing. Apollo mourned her, then made her leaves his sacred crown. Is that healthy? Absolutely not. Is it on brand? Completely. As the god of prophecy, Apollo technically knows how things will end, but still manages to be deeply surprised and personally offended when they do. He established the oracle at Delphi, where priestesses inhaled mysterious vapors and delivered cryptic riddles that supposedly explained destiny, but mostly caused headaches for ancient travelers. Apollo's love life is a masterclass in poetic overkill. He chased mortals, was rejected by most, and responded with tragic drama. When his lover Hyacinthus died, possibly from a discus accident of Apollo's own making, Apollo was so heartbroken that he turned the boy into a flower. Sweet. If you ignore the blunt force trauma, Apollo is also the god of healing, though his bedside manner is a gamble. He could cure plagues or cause them, depending on whether you brought him the right offering or accidentally insulted his poetry. In short, Apollo is brilliance wrapped in insecurity, power dressed up as poetry, and charm with a hair-trigger temper. The kind of god who writes you a love song and then threatens to shoot you with an arrow if you don't give him a standing ovation. And now the real unsung hero, Hestia, goddess of the hearth, home and domestic peace. She's the only Olympian who didn't cause a weekly international incident or participate in the godly Hunger Games. Eldest daughter of Cronus and Rhea, Hestia was the first to be swallowed whole by her delightful father, and, in a cosmic game of reverse birth order, the last to be regurgitated when Zeus overthrew him. This means, by the strange math of mythology, Hestia is both the oldest and the youngest Olympian. Greek logic, not even once. But unlike her more combustible siblings, Hestia chose peace. She didn't chase power, didn't throw curses, didn't sleep with mortals, and didn't even bother with passive-aggressive shade. She was offered a throne on Olympus. shrugged, and gave it to Dionysus, so she could tend the eternal flame without getting dragged into yet another family dispute. That's what I call queen behavior. No throne, just vibes, and perfectly swept floors. Hestia presided over the hearth, the center of every Greek home, temple, and city. Where there was a flame burning for warmth, food, or prayer, Hestia was there. No temples with her name on the front, no dramatic myths, just a quiet, constant presence that kept everything else from falling apart. She's the original background essential. Hestia was also the goddess of hospitality. In a world where shelter and food meant survival, she represented the sacred duty of caring for guests. Invoke her and your fire stays lit, your bread doesn't burn, and maybe minus, just maybe, your extended relatives leave before overstaying their welcome. Unlike most Olympians, she didn't turn people into animals, objects, or living metaphors. Hestia didn't need revenge. She had inner peace and a well-ordered home. Because of her, every meal began and ended with an offering. Every city had her flame burning at its heart, and every prayer circle probably included someone whispering, "Thank you for not being a handful." If the gods were a dysfunctional office, Zeus would be the CEO with chronic boundary issues, Athena the overqualified strategist, Dionysus the walking HR violation, and Hestia the calm office manager who keeps the coffee warm and the lights on while everyone else argues about who set the break room on fire. Hestia reminds us there is power in stillness, value in simplicity, and that sometimes the most essential figure is the one who doesn't demand attention, but quietly holds everything together. So as much as the drama queens of Olympus hog the limelight, let's take a moment to appreciate the goddess, who never needed a headline to shape the world. Because, let's be honest, without Hestia's eternal flame, all those divine shenanigans would have just played out in the dark. And speaking of dualities and the ones you don't see coming, our next story introduces someone who exists in the space between light and shadow, power and vulnerability. Persephone is one of the most fascinating figures in Greek mythology. But before we get swept away by her double life and the impossible standards of mythical beauty, let's dive into how Psyche's isolation began, not with monsters or curses, but with a face that could launch 1,000 anxieties. Let's talk about Persephone, the original queen of mixed signals. She's the only goddess with her moods mapped out in the calendar, wearing a floral crown 1 minute and ruling with a stare that could wilt your soul the next. Daughter of Demeter, who basically invented the concept of helicopter parent before helicopters were even a thing, Persephone was always meant to be a symbol of growth, rebirth, and the general joy of not starving. But then, as is tradition in these stories, fate and the gods had other plans. Enter Hades, professional brooder and CEO of the underworld, who caught sight of Persephone picking wild flowers and decided on the spot, "That's my future queen." No small talk, no bouquet, not even a brunch invitation, just straight-up abduction. The gods really did invent the worst first dates. Demeter, meanwhile, went full apocalypse mom. She tore across the earth searching for her daughter, and when no one would spill the truth, she did what any reasonable harvest goddess would do. She shut down the food supply. Fields withered, granaries emptied, and mortals found themselves suddenly fasting without signing up for it. The whole world teetered on the edge of starvation, and only then did Zeus get involved. Not because he missed his daughter, but because nobody was making sacrifices with empty stomachs. If you ever wondered whether the king of the gods was sentimental, there's your answer. Negotiations finally happened. Persephone could return if she hadn't eaten anything in the underworld. But in a twist worthy of a legal drama, she'd already tasted 6 pomegranate seeds, just enough to doom her to a biannual commute between worlds. So she split her time, half the year basking in sunlight with her mother, coaxing the earth into bloom, and the other half seated beside Hades, presiding over the realm of shadows. The ancient Greeks, always on brand, managed to explain seasonal depression with a single myth. Persephone is the goddess, who literally brought winter. But here's the real plot twist. Persephone didn't stay the tragic, delicate flower. Over time, she claimed her shadowed throne with a quiet, chilling authority. No longer just the lost daughter, she became the judge of souls, the queen mortals prayed to for mercy at the edge of death. She learned to hold both sides of herself, the innocence of spring and the gravity of decay, without apology. Transformation wasn't just her job description, it was her entire identity. She became the living embodiment of duality, a divine paradox who could walk through meadows and mausoleums with the same unflinching grace. She's why the earth bursts with colour and why it falls silent again. She's the goddess who reminds us that even loss can bloom into power. Now, while Persephone was mastering the art of reinvention, somewhere far from the underworld, a mortal girl named Psyche was dealing with her own brand of divine torment. From the moment Psyche could toddle, people whispered that she was more than human. By the time she reached adulthood, her beauty had turned into a full-blown cult. Statues of Aphrodite, yes, the goddess of beauty herself, sat collecting dust while pilgrims lined up just to catch a glimpse of Psyche's face. Her looks weren't just admired, they were worshipped. Entire towns treated her as if Aphrodite had decided to take up residence in a mortal body. And the rumours only grew wilder with every passing day. For Psyche, though, all that adoration was more isolating than any prison. She moved through crowds like a ghost, beloved by all but truly known by none. Men gazed at her like she was a masterpiece behind glass, untouchable, silent, preserved for admiration, not affection. Even her own family couldn't bridge the distance that her beauty created. Her sisters married respectable men, hosted dinners, and shared laughter around hearth fires. Psyche longed for that kind of warmth, but not a single suitor dared to approach a girl who, according to whispers, might actually be a goddess in disguise, and a rival to Aphrodite. And if you've been paying attention to how the Olympians handle competition, you already know this is a recipe for divine disaster. Aphrodite didn't just take offense, she took it personally. Watching her temples empty while mortals laid flowers at a mere girl's feet, Aphrodite's envy turned to rage. In her eyes, Psyche wasn't a marvel. She was an insult wearing a mortal's skin. Blissfully unaware of the storm gathering above her, Psyche spent her days wandering gardens alone, her only company the flowers that bloomed and died at her touch. She'd never known a lover's embrace, never heard the kind of promises whispered between two people in the dark. Her beauty, the very thing that won her the world's worship, had become a wall that kept her utterly alone. What she wanted most, a soul who would see beyond the surface, remained out of reach. She often stood at her window as twilight crept in, watching the sky dissolve into night, wondering if she was doomed to be admired by everyone but truly loved by no one. No oracle, no priest, not even a passing stranger could answer the question that haunted her, until at last someone did. But this wasn't the arrival of a dashing hero, or a wise old seer, or even a kind-hearted mortal. No, the answer came in the form of a goddess. And she wasn't bringing gifts or wisdom, or even a gentle word. She came with a demand. Revenge was on the menu, and Psyche was about to learn what it meant to be the target of divine attention. And speaking of divine attention, next we turn our gaze to Mount Olympus itself, where beauty meant more than a passing compliment. It was a matter of cosmic pride and vengeance. On Mount Olympus, beauty was more than vanity. Up on Mount Olympus, beauty wasn't just a matter of pride, it was the currency of the gods, and no one traded in that currency quite like Aphrodite. She was the original influencer, the goddess of allure, charm, and all-consuming desire, and she guarded her throne with a jealous ferocity that would make a dragon look like a house cat. But lately, her temples echoed with too much quiet. The fragrance of her incense was fading. Her statue, once draped in garlands, stood abandoned, catching only the stray sunbeam and the lonely sigh of the wind. Mortals, fickle creatures that they are, had found a new obsession, a mortal girl named Psyche. They crowded at her feet, leaving offerings as if she were the goddess herself. To Aphrodite, this wasn't just rude, it was a declaration of war. From her marble perch, Aphrodite watched the scene unfold, envy twisting through her like a serpent. She'd toppled kings for less. The sight of mortals treating Psyche like a living goddess, bowing and praising her beauty, made Aphrodite's blood boil. Who was this mere mortal to challenge divine supremacy? Who was she to steal the worship that rightfully belonged to the goddess of love? Aphrodite had made a career out of punishing hubris, and she was not about to overlook this latest affront. So the goddess did what all Olympians do when their egos are bruised. She called in a family favor. She summoned her son Eros. Now you might know him by his Roman stage name Cupid, but don't let the chubby baby with the bow fool you. Eros was the god of love, yes, but not the fluffy, heart-shaped kind. His love was a force of chaos, a hurricane in disguise. He made queens pine for beggars, warriors betray their brothers, and the entire world wobble on the axis of desire. His arrows didn't whisper, they shouted, turning logic to ash and burning through the most stalwart hearts. Aphrodite's command was as simple as it was cruel. Find that girl, Psyche. Make her fall for something hideous, the lowest of the low. I want her mocked by the very love she's stolen from me. Eros, ever the dutiful son, when his mother's temper flared, slung his quiver over his shoulder and descended to the mortal world under cover of moonlight. He found Psyche asleep in her chamber, her face illuminated by the gentle flicker of candlelight. She was beautiful, too beautiful. Even Eros, who had seen every form of beauty, felt something catch in his immortal chest. This was not the plan. This was a complication. He nocked an arrow, ready to do his mother's bidding. But the universe loves irony. As he leaned closer, his hand slipped, and the arrow grazed his own skin. Just a scratch. Just enough. Suddenly, the god who'd spent eternity meddling in other people's hearts felt his own heart thunder in his chest. Eros had become the unwitting victim of his own power. The god of love was in love, and not just with anyone, with the very mortal he was supposed to ruin. Eros vanished before Psyche stirred, the sting of his own arrow still burning on his skin. He had pierced countless hearts, but never before had he felt this aching, desperate need to protect, to adore, to hide her from the savage games of Olympus. But loving Psyche would come at a price. He could never let her know the truth. If Aphrodite discovered his betrayal, if she sensed even a flicker of his real feelings, there would be no safe corner of the universe for them to hide. Not for Eros, and certainly not for Psyche. So Eros made a silent vow, one heavy with the weight of all his power and all his fear. He would love her, but from the shadows. He would become her invisible guardian, her secret benefactor, her silent companion in a world thick with danger. Meanwhile, Psyche's life had turned inside out. The same beauty that once filled her palace with hopeful suitors now left her alone, isolated. Her admirers vanished, replaced by whispers. The kingdom buzzed with rumors of divine wrath. Her father, desperate for answers, visited the oracle of Apollo, hoping for mercy. But the gods aren't known for comfort. The prophecy returned was merciless. She shall not marry a mortal man. Instead, she will wed a monster, a creature feared even by the gods. Send her to the mountain, dressed as a bride. There, her fate will find her. The royal family's grief was a storm. Her sisters wailed. Her mother clung to her robes. But Psyche felt nothing. She stood as if the wind had carved her from marble. Perhaps, she thought, this was balance. She had been adored but never loved. Now she would pay for beauty she never asked for. Eros watched from above, guilt gnawing at him. He'd meant to save her, but the gods had woven a web of fate around them both. If he intervened openly, Aphrodite would know. If he did nothing, Psyche would be lost, so he devised a plan, one only a god could dream up. He would spirit her away to a hidden palace, a place only he could find, swaddled in enchantment and secrecy. There he would love her as a shadow. He would never reveal his face, never speak his name, never let her glimpse the true shape of her companion. Because if Psyche discovered who he was, if she saw the truth, the whole fragile world he built would shatter in an instant. Even the god of love knew terror, terror of heartbreak, terror of loss. The night Psyche was abandoned on the mountain, she braced for the arrival of some slavering beast, some horror from the deep vaults of divine imagination. Instead, the wind itself lifted her, gentle and steady, carrying her away from the cold stone and the weeping of her family. When she opened her eyes, she found herself in a meadow glowing with impossible flowers. The air shimmered with warmth. A path of perfect stone wound through the fields, leading to a palace that defied reason, all luminous pillars and halls that seemed to hum with her name. No hands built this place. It was conjured from dreams. Psyche stepped through the towering threshold, expecting dread, but finding instead a serenity so deep it felt like a spell. Invisible attendants guided her every step. They washed her feet, garbed her in silks finer than any queen's. and set before her feasts that appeared as if by magic. She was a guest in a paradise where luxury danced with loneliness. At night, a voice drifted to her from the darkness, deep, kind, threaded with sorrow and longing. Do not be afraid. You are safe. This is your home. This was her mysterious husband, the monster the oracle had promised. Yet there was no terror in his tone, no hint of scales or claws, only warmth and gentle laughter in the dark. Still, he never allowed himself to be seen. Each night, he joined her in the hush of their chamber, his touch as soft as a sigh, his presence more felt than seen. At dawn, he vanished, leaving nothing but the memory of a voice and the ache of intimacy without form. Psyche, against all logic, fell in love. She loved the unseen, the unspoken, the mystery of a man who existed only in whispers and touches. Every word he spoke drew her deeper into the labyrinth of longing. But every night, as she drifted to sleep in his arms, he begged her for one thing: never try to see me. Once she gathered the courage to ask, "Why can't I look at you?" His answer was a shadow across the moon. "If you see me, I must leave you forever." And so she obeyed, burying her curiosity beneath layers of trust. But with each day, the weight of the unknown grew heavier. What kind of husband hides his face? What kind of love insists on blindness? And why, when she whispered her name, did he never answer with his own? Psyche tried to convince herself that these questions didn't matter, that love was enough. But the human heart is a nest of restless birds, and the seeds of doubt, once scattered, never stay dormant for long, especially when family gets involved. Time moved strangely in the palace of illusions. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. Psyche tasted every luxury, every comfort. She laughed, she danced, she dreamed, but she also grew lonely. No faces, no names, no truth. Only the voice at night and shadows that pressed soft kisses to her lips. Her sisters, her last link to the world she'd known, haunted her thoughts. One morning, the hush in her invisible palace was broken by her husband's voice, this time lined with sadness. "If you see them, sorrow will follow." "Who?" Psyche asked, her heart pounding. "Your sisters. They come out of love, but what they bring is ruin." Psyche's resolve crumbled. She missed her sisters, their teasing, their warmth, even their envy. They were her tether to the girl she'd been before gods and palaces and voiceless lovers. She pleaded, her voice trembling, "Let me see them, just once, I beg you." Eros hesitated, torn between love and dread. But in the end he could deny her nothing. "You may see them, but be warned. Do not let their words poison what we have. They will try to steal your trust. You must not listen." And so, on a wind as gentle as the first night, Psyche's sisters were delivered to the gates of her impossible garden. They arrived expecting a tomb, a grave, a monument to their sister's tragic fate. Instead, they found her radiant, alive, draped in silks, her skin glowing as if lit from within. She greeted them with open arms, laughter ringing through the palace. But the reunion was brittle. The sisters' smiles were sharp-edged, their embraces tinged with jealousy. "Where is your husband?" one asked, eyes darting around for evidence of monsters. Psyche's answer was simple: "He comes only at night. I've never seen him." The sisters froze, glancing at each other. "Never? He won't let me see his face." Their concern slipped on like a mask. "What if he's hideous? What if he's a beast? Or minus worse, what if he's a god, using you as a plaything and laughing at your blindness?" What started as a visit of love twisted into a contest of envy. The old sibling rivalry, once innocent, now festered into something darker. "He keeps you hidden, dependent, blind. Is that love or a gilded cage?" they pressed. Their words soft, but their intentions sharp. The sisters could see the doubt flicker in Psyche's eyes, and they smiled, satisfied. As they left, they kissed her cheeks and whispered, "Just take a lamp. See for yourself. If he truly loves you, what harm can the truth do?" Psyche watched them vanish on the wind, her heart rattling in her chest. For the first time since arriving in paradise, she trembled, not from fear but from curiosity, that most human of poisons. That night, Psyche lay in the dark, the silk sheets cool against her skin, her husband's arms a gentle weight beside her, his breath steady and calm, but her mind was a tempest. Her sister's words echoed louder than his heartbeat. What if he was a monster? What if he was mocking her? What if everything she'd believed was a lie? She had given herself blindly to a voice in the dark, but was that trust or surrender? Was love supposed to be a leap into oblivion, or did it demand a little light? Unable to sleep, she slipped from the bed, silent as falling snow. Her bare feet touched the cold stone floor. In her hand she clutched a small bronze oil lamp, its flame already kindled. Her heart pounded so loud she feared it would wake the gods themselves. With trembling hands she crept to her husband's side. She leaned in, bringing the lamp close, and as its golden glow spilled over his face, she gasped. Not a monster, not a beast, not a shadow wearing a mask, but a man, no, something more than a man. His hair was spun gold, his lips soft with sleep, and on his back, wings folded like secrets yet to be told. This was Eros, the god of love himself, and he had chosen her. Tears filled Psyche's eyes, not from terror, but from the shock of beauty, from the guilt of betrayal. He had trusted her, warned her, loved her, and in her fear she had doubted him. She leaned closer, yearning to press a kiss to his lips, to whisper her regret before the moment slipped away. But fate, ever the sadist, intervened. A drop of hot oil fell from the lamp, landing on his bare shoulder. Eros woke with a cry, wings snapping open, eyes wide with anguish. "You broke your promise," he said, his voice hollow and wounded. "You trusted fear more than love." "I'm sorry," Psyche whispered, collapsing to her knees. "I just wanted to know." Eros stepped back, his divine glow flickering. "Now you do." With those words he vanished into the shadows, and the palace, once a haven of impossible beauty, crumbled behind him. The walls dissolved into mist, the gardens wilted, the world they had built together unraveled, leaving Psyche alone and shivering on a barren hillside, the lamp still warm in her hands, her heart broken beyond repair. She had seen the god of love and lost him. Not to fate, not to monsters, but to her own doubt. That, my friends, is the price of curiosity in the house of the gods. But Psyche's story doesn't end with heartbreak, not yet. Her journey is just beginning. Because when you lose everything, the world itself becomes your trial. And as dawn broke, Psyche, barefoot and broken, would set out across a landscape colder and more unforgiving than any mountain peak. A world where love must be earned, not given, and where endurance, not beauty, would be tested. Psyche wandered, barefoot and hollow-eyed, through a world that no longer pretended to care whether she lived or died. The gardens that once bloomed for her now looked withered and spiteful. The silk-swathed halls she'd floated through in love were nothing but memory, lost in the cold hush where Eros's voice used to sing her to sleep. Night after night she begged the sky for a sign, searching the stars for some trace of him, but the heavens offered nothing but silence. The earth was mute too, no comforting breeze, no secret rustle in the grass, only the weight of her regret pressing her down with every step. She called for Eros in the forests, in the fields, by the banks of every river she crossed, and even in her dreams. But his reply was as absent as hope. The god of love had vanished, not from Olympus, not from the world, but from her life, and that was worse than any exile. In desperation, Psyche found her way back to her father's palace. Once, it had been the place where she was cherished, where her every step was met with soft voices and adoration. Now the halls echoed with rumours. Her sisters, always quick to turn a knife, strutted about, delighted by her ruin. They whispered that Psyche had married some monster, not a god, and lost everything, her love, her mind, her dignity. No one believed her story about gods and love and winged husbands hiding in the dark. She was a scandal, an embarrassment, a cautionary tale. So Psyche left again. This time she didn't flee because she was cast out, but because she had a purpose burning in her chest. She would find Eros, even if she had to walk the length of the world, even if that meant facing down Olympus itself. Now let me give you a little advice from someone who's been around since before mortals figured out fire. Mortals don't simply stroll up to Olympus. You don't just knock on the doors of the gods and ask for help. But desperate love, as ever, will make people do the unthinkable, So Psyche sought the only being who might know where Eros was, the one who had started this whole mess, Aphrodite herself. And yes, Psyche was terrified. Aphrodite had every reason to hate her. But if there was even a splinter of hope that Eros still loved her, she would face the goddess's wrath and let Olympus shake. She would earn redemption or die trying. She found Aphrodite not in some marble temple, but in a private garden, circled by mirrors that reflected the goddess's impossible beauty from every angle. Aphrodite was gazing into her own reflection, as if she might find some flaw there, though, knowing her, it was more likely she was just admiring herself. Psyche stepped forward, heart pounding. Aphrodite didn't even turn. "I warned you," she said, voice like ice shavings. "I warned you, and still you reached for what was mine." Psyche knelt, lowering her eyes. "I love him," she whispered. Aphrodite's laughter rang out, cold and sharp. "Love him? You mean the son you betrayed? The god you doubted?" Psyche didn't flinch. "I was foolish," she admitted, "but I'll do anything to earn back his trust." Aphrodite finally turned, her gaze as cutting as a blade. "Anything," Psyche nodded. The goddess's lips curled into a smile, but there was nothing kind about it. "Then you'll suffer," Aphrodite said, each word a promise. "You'll be tested. Maybe if you survive, you'll be worthy of my son." With that, Psyche's ordeal began. This wasn't some test of strength or beauty, like the gods usually favor. No, Aphrodite's games were all about devotion, humiliation, and endurance. Psyche would have to face these trials alone, no matter how impossible they seemed. Aphrodite wasted no time. Her reputation for beauty was matched only by her skill for cruelty, especially when someone threatened her pride. If Psyche wanted a chance, just a chance to see Eros again, she had to prove herself by surviving a gauntlet of impossible tasks. The first trial seemed almost laughably simple, at least if you'd never met a goddess with a grudge. Aphrodite led Psyche to a massive storeroom overflowing with mountains of seeds. Barley, millet, lentils, poppy, wheat, beans. Every kind of seed you could name, all dumped together in a heap so chaotic it made your average toddler's playroom look orderly. By nightfall, Aphrodite said, stifling a yawn, "Separate every seed, every grain, into its proper pile. Fail, and you'll never see my son again." With that, she swept off, humming as if she'd just assigned someone to water her roses. Psyche stared at the avalanche of seeds. Even if she had 1,000 hands, she couldn't finish by dawn. But she knelt anyway, picking up one trembling seed after another, her fingers numb with exhaustion and dread. Minutes bled into hours, her eyes blurred, her neck ached, and she was still nowhere close. The pile was mocking her, growing larger with every blink. But the thing about the gods, well, and their animals, is that they're always watching, unseen by Psyche. A line of ants had been observing her struggle. Not just any ants, mind you. These were sacred to Demeter, the goddess of the harvest. Maybe they pitied the girl. Maybe, just maybe, they recognized something familiar in her pain. Or perhaps even ants can be moved by love. Suddenly the floor came alive with movement. Hundreds of tiny legs scurried in perfect coordination. The ants formed living rivers, pouring through the seeds, sorting them with a precision that would put any mortal to shame. Barley in one mound, lentils in another, millet stacked in neat, perfect pyramids. It was nature itself, rewriting the rules of time and labor. By the time dusk crept in, every seed was sorted, each grain in its proper place. When Aphrodite returned, she expected chaos and failure. Instead, she found order so spotless, even her own vanity might have blushed. "You had help," Aphrodite snapped, eyes narrowing. Psyche kept her head bowed. "I did what I could," she said softly. Aphrodite's lips twitched, teetering between anger and reluctant amusement. She hadn't expected the mortal to finish, much less with such dignity. But there was no time for reflection. There were more trials to come, nastier and deadlier ones. "This is just the beginning," Aphrodite warned. "If you want to see Eros again, you'll need more than luck." Psyche, exhausted and aching, nodded. She would do anything, because love, real love, was worth more than pride or divine comfort. Psyche's war had only just begun. Before she could even catch her breath, Aphrodite handed her a second challenge, this one designed to be even crueler. "See that river down there?" the goddess asked, pointing at a winding stream sparkling under the afternoon sun. "It runs beside a meadow where a flock of wild rams graze. Their wool is made of gold. Bring me a tuft of it, a single handful, and do try not to get yourself killed." Aphrodite vanished, leaving Psyche to puzzle over a task that was much more than a chore. These weren't gentle storybook sheep. The golden rams were sacred, their eyes wild, their horns sharp as war spears. Legend said they gored any intruder who dared step into their field, ripping apart man or beast without warning. They glittered like treasure, but guarded it with a fury that would make even a dragon think twice. Still, Psyche made her way down the hill, keeping to the shadows, heart pounding so hard she felt it in her throat. She crouched among the reeds, watching the rams roam. Their hooves cracked against stones, their low growls rumbling across the meadow. Entering their territory in daylight was a death sentence. Her knees buckled. Tears threatened. For a moment she almost gave in to despair. But the world has a way of stepping in. Just when you're at your lowest, a whisper curled through the grass, soft as a lullaby, a voice older than the stones, belonging to the spirit of the river. "Do not enter the field while the sun is high," it murmured. "The rams are wild in daylight, but when the sun sets, they rest. Wait, and then gather the wool from the thorns on the bushes. No beast will miss it." Hope flickered. Psyche waited, heart in her throat, as the sun sank behind the hills. One by one, the rams wandered into the trees, settling down in the cool shadows. When darkness finally blanketed the meadow, Psyche crept forward, silent and careful. She found tufts of golden fleece tangled in the brambles and bark, snagged and left behind by the sleeping rams. By moonlight she gathered the wool and returned to Aphrodite, her hands trembling, her heart pounding with relief and pride. Aphrodite eyed the shimmering handful with a scowl. "Alive again," she muttered, as if the very idea offended her. Psyche said nothing. She didn't gloat, she didn't smile. She simply stood, steady and silent, because love had taught her something the gods seemed to have forgotten. Courage speaks quietly, but it endures. Aphrodite wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. She was running out of patience, and her smiles had vanished completely. Time for a trial that no mortal could survive. "Fetch me water," Aphrodite commanded. Not from some well or mountain spring. No, she wanted water from the river Styx itself. Psyche's blood ran cold. The Styx wasn't just any river. It marked the edge of the underworld, the line between the living and the dead. Its black waters were sacred, cursed and so deadly that even the gods approached with caution. Mortals didn't just fail at the Styx, they disappeared, swallowed up by the place where hope goes to die. Still, Psyche nodded. She followed the goddess's instructions, journeying to the edge of a cliff, so sheer it seemed the world itself had split open. Far below, the Styx churned and coiled, black as onyx, spitting out vapor and the faint, desperate wails of lost souls. The river didn't flow, not like any normal stream. It writhed and twisted, alive with curses and secrets, and as if that wasn't enough, monstrous winged creatures circled above the water, guardians of the underworld, sharper and crueler than any earthly predator. Their claws could strip a soul from its body, and they shrieked at anything foolish enough to draw near. There was no way down, no path, no hope. Psyche collapsed beneath a rock ledge, clutching the crystal vial Aphrodite had given her, the goddess's words echoing in her ears. "Just a sip. Enough to show you tried." Her hands shook. She was so close to surrender. But then, from a crack in the stone, a shimmer appeared, followed by a high, trilling cry. A golden eagle, massive and regal, swooped down, a creature fit for kings and gods. Without a word, the eagle took the vial from Psyche's trembling hands, spread its mighty wings, and dove into the abyss. The winged guardians screamed and slashed at the air, but none dared challenge the eagle, not when it bore the authority of Zeus himself. Even the underworld respects the king of the gods, if only out of mutual loathing. Within moments the eagle returned, the vial filled with the Styx's shimmering deadly water. It placed the vial in Psyche's hands, its eyes bright and knowing. She didn't ask why Zeus had intervened. Maybe Eros had once done the king of the gods a favor. Maybe, even among immortals, love's endurance earns a little respect. Psyche brought the vial back to Aphrodite, her legs like water, her heart battered but unbroken. The goddess took it from her with a stone face, silent and unreadable. Psyche had passed again. But the final trial awaited her, a journey into the underworld itself, a place where even the gods hesitate to tread, and not every love story survives the darkness that lies beyond. And so, as Psyche stands at the edge of the world, ready to descend where no mortal heart returns unchanged, the air itself grows colder. The next challenge isn't just another task. It is a journey through death, through despair, and, maybe, toward transformation. Aphrodite's voice, when it returns, will be colder than the Styx itself. If you've ever had a boss assign you an impossible task just to watch you squirm, you might have a sliver of empathy for Psyche in this moment. Picture Aphrodite, queen of the passive-aggressive power play, voice colder than a tomb. She doesn't even bother with subtlety anymore. For your final task, she announces, you will descend into the realm of Hades. There you are to ask Queen Persephone for a box. Her beauty, to be precise. I require it. I'm feeling a bit faded, and honestly, your continued existence is just exhausting me. If you're sensing an Olympian-level guilt trip wrapped inside a death sentence, congratulations, you're paying attention. No self-respecting mortal would dare set foot in the underworld and expect to return. But Psyche, at this stage, is done hesitating. She's been through enough that the idea of strolling into the land of the dead seems, if not routine, at least not entirely out of her wheelhouse. Eros, her only light, is out of reach. If the road to redemption winds through the depths of Hades, then so be it. She's ready to walk it, however dark. The gods, for once, aren't all cackling in the clouds. Some, maybe Demeter, maybe some unseen spirits with a soft spot for hopeless cases, try to help. Psyche hears them, their voices barely more than a shiver in the air. They lead her to a cave, an entrance to the underworld so old and forgotten it's practically stitched into the world's scar tissue. She comes prepared as any desperate mortal would, 2 coins for Charon, the ferryman, and a couple of barley cakes to bribe Cerberus, the triple-jawed security system nobody wants to tangle with unprepared. Descending into the underworld isn't dramatic fire and brimstone, it's worse. Every step steals warmth from her bones, the air thick with a kind of silence that sets your teeth on edge. Nothing burns here. Instead, the world is muffled, like a dream you can't quite wake from. Shadows drift by, souls, or the faded sketches of them, hollow, untouchable, barely aware of anything beyond their own old regrets. At the edge of the river that divides the realms of the living and the dead, Charon appears. He's not much for conversation, but he accepts her coins and ferries her across. The boat slides through water stained by centuries of sorrow, every ripple a memory that's gone and can't be reclaimed. On the far shore, Cerberus blocks the way, all 3 heads snapping and snarling. Psyche, nerves like violin strings, offers the barley cakes. The beast, ever the professional, quiets, wolfish eyes locked on her as he scarfs down the bribe and lets her pass. Inside Persephone's palace, the air is heavier still, the darkness more absolute. Persephone sits on her throne, calm as you please, her eyes glowing like garnets in candlelight. She considers Psyche for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You seek beauty, Persephone says, her voice more velvet than ice. But are you ready for the price? Psyche doesn't flinch. I don't want it for myself, Aphrodite demands it. Perhaps, just for a heartbeat, Persephone's gaze softens. Maybe she, of all immortals, knows what it means to be swept up, held captive, and changed forever by the whims of others. Persephone hands Psyche a small, unassuming box. It's plain, almost disappointingly so, yet there's a weight to it that bends reality around her hands. Do not open it, Persephone warns, and her voice is the kind that brooks no argument. What's inside is not for mortal eyes. Psyche bows, thanks her, and turns to leave. The return path is quieter, but the box, oh, the box, gnaws at her resolve. She can feel its contents humming beneath her fingertips, temptation curling like smoke in her mind. What if this is the key to winning Eros back? What if she could finally become something more than the sum of her trials? She argues with herself the entire way, the surface world drawing closer, sunlight flickering through the cracks. And then, at the threshold of day, curiosity unspools her last thread of caution. Maybe, she thinks, one little peek. What harm could it do? She opens the box. It's not beauty that spills from the darkness. It's a chill so deep it stops time. A mist flows over her, cold as the grave, and with it comes sleep, no ordinary slumber, but a deathless stillness, the kind Persephone crafts to keep her world undisturbed. Psyche doesn't scream. She simply lets go, her body folding to the earth at the border between night and day, the sealed box beside her, her breath caught in that infinite pause. If this were any other myth, that would be the end. The gods would chalk it up to another mortal, undone by her own flaws, and move on. But love, as always, has other plans. Eros, far above on Olympus, hasn't forgotten her. His wounds have faded, but the ache in his heart is a wound that refuses to close. Every day, he's haunted by visions of Psyche, battered by the impossible tasks Aphrodite throws at her. The news that she's braved the underworld for him is the final blow. Suddenly, defiance surges in him, a spark he inherited, ironically from his mother's own stubborn streak. He bursts from Olympus, wings unfurling in a blaze of gold, the sky parting before him. He races across heavens and earth until he finds her, lying in the grass, motionless. She looks less like a fallen heroine and more like a broken statue, pale and perfect, paused at the edge of two worlds. Eros drops beside her, tears streaming down his face, not of pure grief, but a cocktail of rage, regret, and love, too overwhelming for words. He seals the box, draws her into his arms, and presses his lips to hers. No magic spell, no divine ritual, just a kiss, a memory, a plea, a promise, whispered from soul to soul. Psyche stirs, her eyes flutter, breath returns, and she gasps as if waking from a century of sleep. Her first word is his name, soft as a prayer. Eros, voice trembling, replies, "I never stopped loving you." He holds her as if letting go would unmake the universe, and in that moment Olympus itself seems to pause. The gods, who have been watching this saga unfold like an endless soap opera, finally see something new. Eros, the god of love, has been bested by his own heart. Psyche, immortal, has walked through death itself, survived it even. Together they've crossed the boundaries that even the gods claim are absolute. And of course, nothing terrifies Olympus quite like a new precedent. Aphrodite is furious. She storms into the divine court, robe swirling, thunder in her eyes. This mortal has mocked us, broken our laws, and corrupted my son. She cannot be allowed to live, but the rest of the gods aren't so sure anymore. They've watched Psyche suffer, persevere, and rise again. There's a grudging respect in some eyes, a flicker of awe in others. She has endured more than any mortal in living memory, and all for love. The matter, as always, goes to Zeus, king of the gods, ruler of the universe, and, let's be honest, the original drama king. He sits in silence, lightning coiled in one fist, destiny wrapped around his other fingers. After an eternity of deliberation, he finally speaks. There is power in a love that endures, Zeus declares, his voice echoing through the halls. Aphrodite starts to protest, but he silences her with a glance. You have tested her beyond measure. She has passed in ways no mortal has before. She is not unworthy of Olympus. Zeus turns to Eros and Psyche. Do you truly wish to be together forever? Both nod, not a tremor between them. Then so be it. He conjures a goblet, filled to the brim with ambrosia, the nectar of immortality. He offers it to Psyche, telling her, "Drink, and you will be as we are. No longer mortal, your heart will beat with eternity, but your trials will remain as ours do. The stories that shape us stay with us always." Psyche accepts. Her hands are steady. She drinks. Instantly, warmth blooms inside her, not a burning, but a flowering whole. Her senses expanding, every heartbeat resonating like a temple bell. In that instant, she is remade. No longer fragile, no longer less. She stands among the gods, not as a curiosity, but as an equal. Eros takes her hand, and Zeus declares them husband and wife before all of Olympus. For once, love story does not end in tears or blood. It ends in coronation. The transformation is total. Psyche's skin glows with a radiance no mortal could bear. Her eyes hold galaxies, not sorrow. The gods who once sneered at her are silent now, confronted by a new kind of divinity, one not born of bloodline, but of endurance and choice. For the first time in Olympus's long, scandal-ridden history, a mortal has earned godhood, not through lineage, but through the power of love. Even Aphrodite, the original gatekeeper, cannot deny what stands before her. Psyche, the survivor, the lover, the soul, a woman who faced death, temptation, betrayal, and loneliness, and still chose love over pride. Aphrodite is not quick to forgive, but Eros, her son, her rival, her equal, steps forward. "She is not your rival, mother," he says gently. "She is something else entirely, the soul that understands love." Aphrodite says nothing, but her silence is as close to surrender as she'll ever come. Zeus, with all the pomp and circumstance you'd expect, proclaims Psyche the goddess of the soul. Her very name, Psyche, means soul and breath of life. Her story is no longer a cautionary tale, it's a revelation. The trials she endured have not made her flawless, but they have made her more than mortal. She is the living proof that love, when tested and scarred, can become something indestructible. Olympus erupts in celebration. Nectar flows, the stars themselves seem to dance, and even the fates, notorious for their poker faces, allow themselves a rare smile. Psyche stands beside Eros, not as a supplicant or a prize, but as an equal. Together, they watch over the world below, guardians of love and the journey of the soul. As if to underline the point, their union produces a daughter, Hedone, goddess of pleasure and delight, embodiment of joy, born from the marriage of love and soul. Psyche, who once stumbled through shadows and thorns, now moves in eternal light. Not because she is perfect, but because she has loved, fallen, been battered, and risen again. She is proof that even the broken-hearted can find their way to the heavens, one impossible task at a time. The story of Eros and Psyche doesn't end as so many mortal loves do, in tragedy or silence. It ends in transformation, not into a cold marble myth, but into something far greater, a truth that echoes from ancient temples to modern bedrooms. Real love is never easy. It bleeds, it doubts, it breaks, but when it endures it becomes immortal. Psyche's journey began with beauty, a curse she never wanted. She was worshipped by strangers, envied by her own sisters, manipulated by gods who had never known a day's uncertainty. She was punished for being loved, then punished again for daring to love in return. Yet she kept going. Even when her heart shattered, even when hope slipped through her fingers, she put one foot in front of the other, refusing to let pain have the last word. And Eros, the god who thought himself untouchable, learned that love is not a weapon, not a game, not something to hoard in the dark. It is a light, but only when it is faced. Together they remind even the gods of Olympus that love is not their exclusive domain. It belongs to anyone willing to struggle for it, to fight, to forgive, to endure. For centuries after, lovers across Greece would whisper prayers not only to Aphrodite, but to Psyche. Her name would be invoked at weddings, at births, even at funerals, because she wasn't just another goddess. She was a reminder that the soul survives. That love, no matter how battered, can rise again. That even the deepest darkness cannot hold you if your heart is willing to keep moving. Today, long after marble temples have crumbled and the gods have faded into stories, Psyche lives on. In our words, Psyche meaning soul. In our sciences, psychology, the study of that soul. In every story where love is tested and survives, Eros and Psyche are there. Not as statues or dusty myths, but as living echoes in all of us. Every time you choose hope over cynicism, forgiveness over anger, love over fear, you walk their path. Maybe, just maybe, you become a little more divine for it. But if you think Olympus is the only place for transformations, think again. There are other stories, darker ones, sharper ones. Not every metamorphosis ends in light. Some begin in beauty and end in exile. Some begin with a girl, a goddess's rage, and a head full of snakes. Long before she was feared, before statues froze mid-scream and serpents whispered across marble floors, Medusa was a mortal girl, beautiful beyond compare, before the world learned to fear her name, before petrified faces stared out from ruined courtyards and snakes hissed between shattered columns. Medusa was just a girl. Not an ordinary girl, mind you, nothing so simple in this world of vengeful gods and poetic injustice. But she was mortal, and her beauty was a quiet, effortless thing. It wasn't the sort that screamed for attention or strutted across marble floors demanding worship. No, Medusa's beauty slipped in like a sunrise through cracked temple stones, gentle and persistent, impossible to ignore even by those who tried. Her hair was like midnight silk, pouring down her back in inky waves. Her eyes, deep and tranquil, held the promise of storms, but for the most part, they only reflected a calm the gods themselves rarely achieved. She had a presence that could unnerve even the hardest of hearts, mortal or divine, and yet Medusa never tried to wield her beauty as a weapon. She wore it as one might wear a birthmark, unasked for, inescapable, and entirely her own. Medusa was born into the infamous brood of Gorgons, a family with a reputation that made most mortals cross themselves and back away slowly. Her sisters, Stheno and Uriel, were the sort of immortals that haunted bedtime stories, their monstrous forms inspiring equal parts worship and terror. But Medusa was the anomaly, the lone mortal among monsters, the only one who could die. It was this mortality that made her both precious and vulnerable, a living spark surrounded by the fireproof. Yet, if you're expecting Medusa to have craved power, lovers, or a seat at Olympus's dysfunctional family table, you'd be wrong. She never wanted those things. What she chose was rarer, devotion. From a young age, Medusa sought out a life of meaning through service, turning her back on the chaos of ambition and desire. She became a priestess of Athena, the goddess famed for her wisdom, her warcraft, and her ice-cold restraint. In a temple perched high above the churning Aegean, Medusa swept stone floors long before sunrise, lit fragrant incense that wound through the shadowy chambers, and whispered prayers with reverence that would put most kings to shame. She pledged herself to chastity, to purity, and most of all to silence, not because anyone forced her, but because she yearned for something steadfast in a world of shifting allegiances. Medusa admired Athena, not just as a goddess, but as a kind of ideal, untouchable, unyielding, immune to the drama that plagued mortals. In time, she became a living statue to those who entered the temple, a symbol of the goddess herself, her beauty almost sacred, her presence quietly commanding. But beauty, even in the sanctum of a goddess, is never safe. Word of Medusa's grace rippled outward, slipping through city streets, over mountains, across the wine-dark sea, and up into the ears of the gods. And as anyone who has ever read a Greek myth knows, attention from Olympus is rarely a blessing. Admiration, in divine circles, has a way of turning into obsession, and the fine line between appreciation and entitlement is seldom observed. It wasn't wisdom that took notice of Medusa, nor restraint. It was Poseidon, the god of the sea, lord of storms and appetites, a walking hazard sign in a chariot of crashing waves. Poseidon, who had conquered monsters, unsettled continents and claimed goddesses, now found himself fixated on a mortal priestess, not because of her beauty alone, but because she seemed utterly beyond his reach. Medusa belonged to no one, no man, no god, not even herself, really. She had chosen a life of service, one that left her out of reach of desire. And that, perhaps, was what tempted Poseidon most of all. The more Medusa prayed, the more Poseidon watched. His curiosity twisted into hunger, and hunger for gods is almost always a prelude to disaster. One evening, as the tide rose and the temple echoed with emptiness, Poseidon emerged from the sea. He didn't bother with the formalities. Gods rarely do. Water pooled around his feet as he strode into Athena's marble halls, the salt air thick and electric. Medusa, alone and unsuspecting, turned at the sound of dripping water and saw the sea god looming in the shadows. His trident was nowhere in sight, but the hunger in his gaze was unmistakable. She called out to Athena, but her voice vanished into the vastness. She ran, but the temple was built for worship, not for escape. And so, beneath the cold, unblinking stare of Athena's stone likeness, Poseidon shattered what was sacred. It wasn't seduction. It was theft, pure and merciless, a god's appetite draped in the tattered remains of sanctity. When Poseidon was finished, he vanished, leaving only the scent of brine and the echo of Medusa's broken sobs. She curled beneath the statue of her goddess, waiting for justice, for comfort, for any sign that her devotion had not been in vain. But the gods are not custodians of justice. Their priorities lie elsewhere. When Athena returned, her rage was volcanic, but it was not aimed at Poseidon. Divine pride in the sanctity of her temple mattered more than the suffering of a mortal girl. Athena's temple had been violated, her rules shattered, and someone had to pay. But punishment in Olympus is never about fairness. It's about symbolism, about keeping up appearances for the Pantheon's eternal PR campaign. Athena descended from her pedestal, her marble gaze fixed on Medusa, who knelt in shame before her. The incense had long since burned out. Silence pressed in, thick as seawater. Medusa, trembling, looked up, hoping for mercy, for the faintest flicker of understanding from the goddess she had served so faithfully. But Athena's eyes were hard as flint. "You have brought shame into my house. Let the world see what becomes of beauty that invites destruction." Her voice echoed through the stone like thunder. With a single cold gesture, she reached out and touched Medusa's brow. The transformation was monstrous in its speed and cruelty. Medusa's midnight hair twisted, thickened and split, each strand unraveling into a hissing serpent. Their scales flashed green and gold, their tongues flickering with venomous secrets. Her skin lost its warmth, taking on the chill sheen of stone. Her eyes, once soft with sorrow, now burned with a terrible supernatural power. Anyone who met her gaze would be turned to stone, not just foes or intruders, but any living creature, friend or stranger. It was not a curse designed for justice or even protection. It was exile, in the most literal sense. Isolation weaponized. Medusa screamed, but her voice was no longer human. Her tears, once salty and warm, dried on her cheeks before they could fall. Her breath turned shallow. Her reflection shattered every mirror and polished surface she passed. Worst of all, she could no longer look at another soul without destroying it. Athena did not look away. She did not flinch. She only watched as her devoted priestess, once beautiful and beloved, became something else entirely, a monster sculpted by divine hands. When the temple doors slammed shut behind Medusa, her cries echoed across the cliffs, unanswered. No home awaited her. No sanctuary, no sisters, no more whispered prayers. She wandered, haunted by the memory of what she had lost, her footsteps trailing a path of stone statues, silent witnesses to her suffering. In Olympus, Athena returned to her throne, unmoved. For the gods, punishment is not measured in mercy, but in endurance. Medusa's face would outlast time itself, a warning etched into the bones of the world. Banished from city and temple, Medusa fled into the wilderness, hunted by her own legend. Every step she took left a mosaic of stone in her wake, a bird mid-flight, a deer in the brush, even the smallest insect. Each creature that met her gaze froze forever in a tableau of silent terror. Seeking a place where no mortal dared tread, she journeyed beyond rivers, past crumbling ruins, across lands where the names of gods were whispered only in fear. She found herself at last on a barren, windswept island, perched at the edge of the known world, a place so desolate, even the gods forgot its name. Here she built nothing. Roofs are pointless when the stars are indifferent, and walls are only reminders of the homes you've lost. The cave that became her shelter was already crowded with statues, former heroes, beasts, perhaps even the occasional wanderer, unlucky enough to stumble upon her. Each stone figure was a testament to her curse, a record of her isolation. Her second life began, not as a priestess, but as a pariah. Medusa's tears dried up. They belonged to the girl she'd been, the one who believed in fairness, who offered incense and loyalty to a goddess who would not return either. That Medusa had died on a cold temple floor. In her place stood a woman sculpted by betrayal, haunted by the memory of devotion. The serpents in her hair became her only companions. They whispered to her in dreams, not with words but with instinct. A chorus of warning, a shiver of unease at the approach of anyone, mortal or otherwise. Her hair, once her pride, was now her only shield. Her eyes, her curse, her soul, a flickering shadow. She began to carve the walls of her cave, etching figures and faces into stone, memories of her sisters, outlines of hands, the shape of the temple she'd once called home. Even her own reflection was lost, so she left her story in the only language left to her, stone. The world outside twisted her memory. Occasionally self-styled heroes arrived, drawn by tales of the monster who turned men to marble. They came seeking glory, imagining themselves as dragon slayers and monster vanquishers. But none returned. They underestimated her, misjudged not just her power, but the depth of her pain. With each death, Medusa felt herself slipping further from the girl she had been, her humanity eroding under the weight of myth. The gods, meanwhile, had already turned their gaze elsewhere. In the bustling city-states and sacred groves of Greece, Medusa's story began to warp. Her name became a warning, passed from tongue to tongue, her origins buried beneath a heap of convenient lies. Where once she was a priestess, her tale was retold as that of a temptress, a living curse, a beast who lured men to their doom. No one mentioned Poseidon's trespass or Athena's cold fury. The divine reputations were airbrushed out, sanitized for public consumption by priests and poets who preferred their gods blameless and their monsters easily identified. Children were warned that Medusa would come for those who disobeyed. Soldiers painted her face on their shields, not to honor her but to mock her. Her image turned into a weapon by the very gods who had engineered her fall. Artists carved her likeness into pottery, her writhing hair a symbol of terror, her eyes a threat. She became a living cautionary tale, her story twisted by the very hands that had once protected her. In exile, Medusa could only feel the weight of these distortions. She had never asked to become a monster. She had only tried to survive, and survival, in the eyes of those in power, is always suspect. Yet, not everyone believed the official version. In the remote hills and quiet villages, old women left offerings at cave mouths, whispering that Medusa protected women who had suffered. They didn't fear her. They pitied her. They called her the guardian of the wronged, a silent sentinel for the wounded and betrayed. But these voices were soft, easily drowned out by the clamour of hero myths and the roar of empire. Medusa remained hidden, lost to the world, her name split between monster and martyr. What she did know was simple. No matter how far she ran, they would come. Men with shining swords and borrowed courage, men who craved the illusion of heroism, men who never cared who she was, only what she had become. And somewhere, even as she carved her memories into stone, a new challenger was being born, a boy who would one day grow into a man, a hero, and her final visitor. And that, dear listener, is where the winds begin to shift. Because while Medusa lived in exile, her legend spreading like wildfire, a new story, one just as tragic and twisted, was already taking root. The next chapter belongs to Perseus, and to the tragic collision of myth and memory that would decide the fate of them both. While Medusa languished in exile, her name drifted across the world like smoke from a distant fire, something you could smell before you knew what it was. Meanwhile, far from her lonely island, another story was brewing in a very different kind of silence. Picture a young boy named Perseus, cradled not by his mother's arms, but by a prophecy so suffocating it made even the gods uneasy. His mother Danae was locked away in a bronze tower by her own father, King Acrisius, who was so terrified by a whisper of fate that he tried to outmaneuver destiny itself. The oracle had told him that his grandson would be his undoing, but if there's one thing you learn after a few thousand years of watching mortals, it's that you can't outwit the gods. You can't even outwit a prophecy. All you can do is stall for time and hope the gods get distracted by someone else's drama. But Zeus is never distracted for long. He slipped into Danae's prison, not with flowers or a ladder or any gesture that could pass for actual romance, but as a glittering shower of gold. Yes, golden rain, the kind of move only an immortal could pull off, and only a mortal could be forced to endure. From that strange, shimmering encounter, Perseus was conceived, a child born not out of love, but out of inevitability. When Acrisius discovered the boy, he quaked at the thought of incurring Zeus's wrath. Cowardice is a currency with kings. Instead of bloodshed, he chose banishment. mother and baby sealed in a wooden chest, cast into the sea like a dark secret. It was less an execution, more an abdication of responsibility. Let the waves bear the guilt. Poseidon, ruler of the sea, is many things: petty, vengeful, occasionally helpful when it suits him. On this day he let mother and son drift, not to their graves but to the rocky shores of Seriphos. There a fisherman named Dictys, bless his ordinary mortal heart, rescued them. He raised Perseus in obscurity, teaching him the patient strength of survival, the necessity of humility, and the art of staying invisible in a world ruled by gods and tyrants. Dana, for her part, never uttered Zeus's name, never revealed the truth of Perseus' parentage. Some wounds you don't name aloud. Years passed, and the boy grew into a young man with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. He was strong, yes, but there was a restlessness in him, the kind that comes from growing up in the shadow of secrets and the echo of a prophecy that never quite leaves your ears. Enter King Polydectes of Seriphos, a man whose ambition was as oily as his hair. He set his sights on Danae, but Perseus, loyal and unyielding, stood between them. Polydectes, expert in the art of humiliation, concocted a feast where every guest was to bring a gift. Perseus, poor and proud, arrived empty-handed. The king, with a sneer sharp enough to draw blood, demanded a gift to match the occasion. "Then bring me the head of Medusa," he said, and the hall erupted in laughter. It was supposed to be a joke, a public shaming, but pride is a dangerous thing, especially when you mix it with desperation and prophecy. Perseus accepted the challenge, his honor stung, his future sealed. Up on Olympus, the gods watched with their usual mix of boredom and malice. Athena, who never quite forgot or forgave her own role in Medusa's fate, saw a chance to balance the scales, or at least tip them in a direction that assuaged her guilt. She, along with Hermes, visited Perseus in dreams, their voices curling through his sleep like incense smoke. They bestowed upon him a collection of divine gadgets: winged sandals for flight, a polished shield bright enough to blind the sun, a sword sharp enough to slice through myth itself, and the helm of Hades, making the wearer invisible even to the gods. These were not gifts of compassion. They were tools for a story that had to be completed, a narrative that started not with Perseus, but with a girl praying alone in a temple, centuries forgotten. Armed with these wonders, Perseus set off, the weight of a king's dare and the gods' expectations pressing on his shoulders. Of course, finding Medusa wasn't as simple as following a map. Her very location was a secret, shrouded in layers of myth, and buried beneath the shame of Olympus. Even the gods, those celestial busybodies, had lost track of her over the years. So Perseus went searching for answers in the shadows, turning to the only beings old enough to remember where Medusa hid, the Grady, 3 ancient sisters who looked like someone's nightmares stitched together from spare parts. They shared one eye and one tooth, passing them back and forth in a dance of spite and necessity. Perseus, clever as ever, waited for the perfect moment, when the eye changed hands and snatched it away. "Tell me where she is," he demanded, his voice steady, "or remain blind forever." The sisters hissed, their voices like wind in a graveyard, but they capitulated. They described an island far beyond human maps, a place where the sea broke ships on cruel rocks and silence reigned. There Medusa slept, surrounded by the stony remains of those who'd come before, heroes, villains, all equal now in their defeat. Not even the stars lingered over that place. The birds had long since given up. With directions in hand and nerves steeled by necessity, Perseus soared across the sky, winged sandals slicing through the clouds. His heart beat not with fear, but with a mounting anticipation, the kind that tastes like victory, or maybe just the hope of finally being seen. In his mind, he saw himself returning triumphant, Medusa's head in hand, his mother safe, the king silenced, his own legend assured. He never paused to wonder about the woman he'd been sent to destroy, never questioned the story he'd inherited, that Medusa was a monster, and monsters deserved to die. The gods gave him everything he needed, except the truth. As Perseus neared the island, the air thickened. The wind howled with a warning he couldn't quite decipher. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. When he landed, everything was still. No birds, no breeze, only the endless rows of statues, twisted and frozen in the moment of terror, mouths open in silent screams. eyes wide with horror, their last sight forever burned into stone. Perseus picked his way through the graveyard of ambition and arrogance, shield at the ready, sword sheathed but never far from his hand. Athena's warning echoed in his mind. Do not look at her directly. Only the reflection. Be quick. Be silent. What she failed to mention was the reason for the surprise etched into the faces of these stone men. They didn't look like warriors slain in battle. They looked like people who, in their final heartbeat, realized they'd made a terrible mistake. The cave's entrance yawned before him, cool and damp, smelling of moss, old snakeskin, and something deeper, an ancient sorrow. The hiss of serpents came first, a low chorus of warning, but not fury. Wariness, maybe. He stepped inside, every muscle taut, every breath measured, and there she was, Medusa. Not the roaring Gorgon of legend, but a woman asleep, curled into herself on a bed of stone. Her arms hugged her chest, the serpents atop her head resting as if they too dreamed of peace. In the mirrored shield, Perseus saw not a monster, but a woman whose beauty, strange and fractured, clung to her like a memory. Even beneath the writhing snakes, you could see the soft lines of a face that once belonged to a devoted priestess, a girl full of hope. Perseus paused. This was not the beast he'd been sent to slay. She slept, vulnerable, not knowing death waited in her dreams. He hesitated, his mind flickering between duty and doubt. But the weight of the gods, the shadow of his mother's suffering, the sneer of Polydectes, all of it hardened his resolve. He remembered glory. He remembered why he'd come. Raising the sword, eyes fixed on the mirrored reflection, he crept closer. One of the serpents stirred, tongue flickering, but Medusa did not wake. Her eyelids fluttered, her breath was soft, almost childlike. She did not scream, she did not fight. She simply slept. And in that moment, cold, quick, unceremonious, Perseus struck. The blade sliced through the quiet. Silence descended, heavier than before. Her head toppled into the bronze-lined satchel, the curse complete, or so Perseus believed. The island itself seemed to exhale, but not in relief, more like resignation. You can end a life, but not a story. Not a myth, and Medusa's myth was only just beginning to unravel. Perseus didn't linger. He sealed Medusa's head in the enchanted bag, careful to avoid her gaze even in death. The snakes writhed, their tongues testing the air, their bodies restless, the eyes miners open, unblinking, still shimmered with lethal power, capable of petrifying anything foolish enough to look inside. Perseus dared not. He had been given a weapon by the gods, a trump card in the games mortals play with fate. But as he lifted off, sandals beating against the clouds, the silence of the island clung to him. It was not the silence of victory, but of something lost, something broken. He flew over the waves, the satchel heavier than any trophy should be. Deep beneath the sea, Poseidon felt a tremor, the balance disturbed. Athena, ever watchful, recognized the cost. Even the fates, those fickle spinners of destiny, paused in their weaving. A storm began to gather far above Olympus, as if the world itself mourned the turning of the tale. Still, Perseus pressed on. His mind was awash with visions of homecoming, of kings brought low, of his mother's freedom. He imagined how the bards would sing of his courage, yet the satchel throbbed with a strange, persistent energy, a hum that was not a sound, but a feeling, a memory that would not be silenced. He remembered the mirrored shield, the face he'd glimpsed. She had not bared her fangs, had not lunged to kill. She had simply lain there, dreaming, alone. Was that the face of a monster? Or the face of a warning ignored? He tried to brush the thought away. The gods had chosen him, equipped him, guided him. Surely this was right. Wasn't it? But as the wind screamed around him, Perseus began to sense that the head he carried was not simply a trophy. It was a story still awake, still aware, still full of a pain that could not be buried. In its silence, it whispered of betrayal, of a girl kneeling in a temple, praying for mercy that never came. Perseus would go on to become a hero, to slay monsters, rescue maidens, and carve his legend into the stars. But the uneasy weight of the satchel would haunt him forever. Sometimes, in the quietest hours before dawn, he would swear he heard the faint hiss of serpents beneath his bedroll. Sometimes he dreamed not of triumph, but of a woman abandoned by gods and mortals alike, her story still unfinished. And as he sped towards Seriphos, armor battered by the wind and the head of a legend hidden under his cloak, the world braced for what came next. Because you can kill a monster, but you can't kill what she leaves behind. So let's follow Perseus back to Seriphos, shall we? The wind in his hair, the gods watching from their thrones, and the weight of a legend tucked away, pulsing with the power of a curse that refuses to die. The aftermath of Medusa's death is a tale of consequences, of legacy, and of how a myth continues to shape the world long after the last sword stroke has fallen. Perseus strode into Seriphos as if returning from a fashionably violent weekend getaway, windswept hair, divine armor gleaming, and the severed head of a legend tucked discreetly under his arm. The townsfolk, blissfully ignorant, welcomed him with cheers and garlands, hailing their champion as if he'd fetched them the world's rarest truffle, not the end of a woman's story. No one in the square suspected what Perseus carried, or what price had been paid for this supposed victory. But King Polyctus, Polyctus wasn't fooled. He had never actually expected Perseus to return. The king's challenge had been the ancient Greek equivalent of double dog daring someone to touch a live wire, entertainment, with a side of execution. So when Perseus walked through those palace doors, all sunlight and silent purpose, Polyctus's smug smirk faltered. "You brought me a gift," Polyctus sneered, fingers drumming on the throne, clinging to the last shreds of his authority. Perseus's answer was a single, deliberate nod. "A token of your request." With that, he opened the satchel. For a heartbeat, Polyctus locked eyes with Medusa's severed gaze. A moment, no more. That was all it took. Stone seeped across his skin with the silent urgency of winter's first frost. His lips froze mid-taunt, his last breath suspended somewhere between fear and regret. The king, the mocker, the would-be puppeteer, transformed into a monument of his own hubris, the palace erupted. Courtiers tripped over themselves in panic. Some bolted for the doors, others dropped to their knees praying to gods who, as always, were only half listening. Perseus stood motionless, his face unreadable, as chaos swirled around him. His mother Dia rushed through the tumult, wrapping Perseus in a trembling embrace, relief and disbelief mixing in her eyes. At last she was free. Perseus, though, kept his silence. He didn't mention the girl in the cave, the cost of the quest. For the rest, Medusa was a monster vanquished, a tool wielded, an obstacle toppled. No one paused to ask what she had been before, but Perseus remembered the way her body crumpled, the way her reflection in the bronze had not snarled but begged. He remembered, and said nothing. Still, the story galloped ahead without him. Songs were spun on lyres, bards sang of Perseus, Gorgon slayer, god-touched hero, breaker of curses. Temples sprouted like wildflowers. Marble blocks bore his name, carved deep and proud, but never Nina's, never hers. Medusa's name vanished from the narrative, tucked away like an embarrassment, while Perseus' legend grew. In the years that followed, the head of Medusa was set upon Athena's shield, just as the goddess demanded. Not the sword, not the winged sandals, not the cap of invisibility. No, Athena wanted the head. Perseus obliged, handing over the satchel without a word. With the cold efficiency only a goddess could muster, Athena took the head, her former priestess's head, and affixed it to her aegis. From that day forward, Medusa's face, once gentle, now contorted in frozen rage, stared out from the polished bronze curve of divine power. Wherever Athena marched, war followed. Her enemies quaked, and cities crumbled at a single glance. The aegis became a symbol of both terror and triumph, stamped on coins and etched above temple gates. But no one asked why Medusa had been cursed in the first place. Athena, goddess of wisdom, bore the face of the woman she had punished, not as an act of remorse, but as a warning. This was what happened when mortals overreached. Of course, whispers always find their way through marble and myth. Some claimed Athena wasn't simply reclaiming a weapon. She was offering Medusa a form of immortality, that by crowning her shield with Medusa's visage, Athena ensured that the girl who had once wept in her temple would never be forgotten. Even the gods, it seemed, could not escape the weight of their own actions, but the truth, as ever with the Olympians, was a knot of contradiction. Athena had condemned Medusa for a crime she didn't commit, then paraded that same pain as a trophy. The cycle was complete. Medusa's story had become a carousel of identities, a priestess, a scapegoat, a monster, a weapon, an icon. Yet beneath the snarl frozen on her lips, in the haunted slant of her sculpted eyes, something unspoken endured. Even as armies froze at her gaze, a few, just a precious few, looked upon her and saw not a monster, but a question, a protest. A silent, unblinking warning. That was a power no blade could sever. Medusa's face, immortalized on Athena's shield, was more than a symbol of annihilation. To most, it stood for divine wrath, a threat made manifest. But for those who dared to look deeper, her gaze flickered with memory, injustice, and a truth no temple inscription dared to immortalize. As centuries unspooled, warriors brandished the aegis on blood-soaked fields, oblivious to the fact that the face they wielded once belonged to a woman who had never chosen violence. Her curse, delivered by the gods, had become a tool of emperors and conquerors. Medusa's trauma was now currency. Still, her eyes bore silent witness as time churned forward. She watched kings rise and topple, temples crumble, and heroes morph into tyrants. She saw altars erected in honor of the men who called her a monster, and heard prayers whispered by women who understood all too well what she had lost. Not every offering was public. Sometimes, in the shadowed corners of shrines, women left tiny clay serpents, tokens of remembrance. Sometimes a lock of hair bound with trembling hands, or a name whispered in the darkness, not out of fear but solidarity. Because before Medusa became a horror story, she was a protector. Her cave transformed into a sanctuary where the hunted could not be reached. A graveyard for the arrogant, yes, but also a haven for the wounded. Her legend fractured, splintered, and reformed. To some she remained the Gorgon, the cautionary tale, but to others she was something else, a figure of vengeance, of resistance, a goddess of wrath and wounded justice, a spirit standing between the powerless and those who would prey upon them. Myths, like rivers, changed their course with every generation. Medusa's core endured, a woman wronged, a soul reshaped by pain, a story stolen but a gaze unbroken. Across the centuries, her image migrated, painted, sculpted, struck into coins, haunting the dreams of empires new and old, and in every era, someone would pause, reconsider, and ask, was she truly the monster? In that moment, Medusa's story flickered back to life. Empires fell, gods faded into footnotes, but Medusa persisted, not as flesh and blood, but as symbol and shadow. Her marble face haunted Byzantium, Rome, the faded corners of forgotten cities. Her legend split in two. In one version, she stayed the monster, the Gorgon who turned men to stone, her head nailed above city gates as a ward against evil. Soldiers prayed for her protection in the thick of battle, believing her legend could petrify fear itself. But another current ran beneath the surface, quiet but unyielding. Poets, philosophers, and women, those whose voices rarely made it into the official scrolls, whispered a different Medusa. Not a beast to be slaughtered, but a woman punished for beauty, cursed for a crime inflicted upon her, not by her. This version didn't thunder from the rooftops. It crept along the edges, questioning why a goddess of wisdom would punish her own, why the god of the sea faced no consequence, why so many men travelled across the world just to kill a woman who only wanted to be left alone. In taverns and libraries, in the cracks of marble and the margins of history, these questions took root. Slowly Medusa's image shifted again. She became a mirror, not of terror, but of uncomfortable truth. Women began to see themselves in her, survivors of violence, victims of silence, scapegoats labelled as monsters, simply for refusing to submit. Her serpents transformed from punishment to crown. Her eyes, once a curse, became a shield sharpened by betrayal. Even now, Medusa rises in art and story, not as a spectre of doom, but as a witness. She stares from canvases with grief and fury, her story retold not to glorify Perseus, but to ask why the sword ever made him a hero. Myths evolve. Sometimes the real monster isn't the one with fangs and snakes for hair. It's the one carrying the blade, the one writing the story. In every generation that dares to question the old script, Medusa blinks, just once, and waits for them to understand. So next time you see her face on a museum wall, in a book, or flickering across a screen, pause. Ask yourself who gets to be the hero, who gets to be the monster, and who gets carved out of the story altogether. That act of questioning is Medusa's real legacy, the power to endure, to provoke, and to make us look twice at the truths we thought we knew. And as long as her gaze endures, so too does the possibility that one day someone will finally see her, not as a monster, but as a woman who refused to disappear.